Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily short story. Now, before I start today's story, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this short story and any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers and at your local bookstore and local library if you requested, and you can order paperback copies from Amazon. Now, here's today's short story. I hope you enjoyed just as much as I did writing it.
Private Eye Convention and Christmas.
What's iFood Con, Auntie?
When Betty heard her nephew Sean ask her that simple question, she wasn't really sure how to answer it. As a private eye, she had just known what it was for as long as she could remember. Betty looked at her tall, slim nephew, and tried to think about how to answer such a strange question, that she knew what it was, she just didn't know how to explain it to someone who wasn't a private eye. The sounds of people talking, chatting and laughing on the awfully cold December night made Betty shiver. She hated the cold, so she pulled her long black overcoat tighter and ignored her nephew. As much as Betty loved him, she needed to buy herself a few extra seconds so she could think of an answer to his question. Betty watched the little families walk around with the occasional parent moaning at their overexcited kids, and other people were weighed down with their Christmas shopping in Bluewater Shopping Centre in southeast England. She was glad her and Sean hadn't bought that much stuff tonight, but she did need to press on with their shopping. That was probably the only downside to the Christmas season. Even more so as a private eye, there were so many cases at Christmas time that it made Christmas shopping in advance impossible. Betty bit her lip as she wondered how many more presents she needed to buy. There was her sister, her boyfriend and more. As she pushed those panicked thoughts away, Betty watched the busy crowd around them go in and out of shops like their lives depended on it. It seemed them too needed to get lots of presents before the big day. The smell of rich Christmas spices filled the air, as Betty and Sean kept walking on, gliding through the crowd and walking like they were on a mission. Because in a way they were. Betty had to get all the presents tonight, considering all the private eye parties started soon. With the smell of the Christmas spices getting stronger with hints of sweat that made her mouth taste of Christmas cake, Betty kept gliding through the crowd as her eyes narrowed for the next shop she needed.
What's iFood Con, Auntie?
Sean asked again, walking next to her. Betty smiled.
It's hard to explain, Sean.
It's a little private holiday for private eyes.
Is it like a Christmas party?
Betty stepped out of the way of a big family of shoppers, and saw a massive wonderful sign in the distance of a perfume shop she needed to go to for her sister. She had no idea why her sister wanted some expensive perfume that she was never going to wear, but Betty just wanted to keep the peace, love her sister, and get on with the rest of the shopping. The only problem was the sea of busy, grumpy shoppers in her way. Auntie? Sean asked. Betty took Sean's hand like she did when he was a toddler, and guided him through the sea of people. In a way, yes, Betty said. It was started a few years back by the Jewish and Muslim private eyes. Betty gently knocked a shopper out of the way so her and Sean could continue through the crowd. They heard all their private eye friends were busy and missing over Christmas as they were celebrating with the family. So the Professional Private Investigator Society created iFood Con as a secular celebration for everyone. Sean said. After making it through the massive sea of grumpy, busy shoppers, Betty loved the amazing smell of the sweet, flowery perfume in the massive shop she entered. Betty cocked her head for a moment, as she didn't remember the shop being this big before, but she loved the long white walls of color perfume bottles in all their different shapes, sizes and prices. She wanted to shake her head when she saw Sean walk over to the unisex, but more feminine perfume, as she knew for a fact that he was getting it for himself. The smell of the sweet flowery perfume kept getting stronger, but Betty knew something was off. It was too strong for someone just spraying. Betty stared at the horribly shiny white floor, and her eyes widened when she saw a smashed bottle of perfume a few meters from her. She walked over and had to cover her nose with her hand, Betty normally loved that perfume, but it was way too strong when she was breathing in a whole bottle of it.
"You're going to have to pay for that, miss," a woman said.
Betty looked at the tall businesslike woman who had said that, and she shook her head. It was silly that this woman thought Betty had done it. She had only just got here.
"I found it like this," Betty said.
The woman shook her head. "They all say that. Come with me, and you can pay for it at the tills."
"I didn't break it."
"I'm innocent. Check your cameras." The woman frowned.
"I know what I saw."
Betty couldn't believe how silly this woman was. She supposed the woman could be fed up with all the stealing and breaking that normally happens at Christmas, but Betty wasn't guilty. "Auntie?" Sean said, walking over.
"Sean, how are you?"
The woman asked.
"How's Harry?"
"We have a new stock that aftershave he likes." Betty wanted to shake her head so badly, trust Sean to walk into a scene and instantly know how to calm it down. That was probably why she had bought him, just in case. "Thank you, I'll take a bottle." "What were you talking to my auntie about?" Betty couldn't believe it when the woman looked at her and explained everything to Sean like Betty was the worst criminal ever. Sean nodded.
"I know my auntie seems shifty, criminal and a bit crazy, but she's safe."
How Betty didn't playfully hit him, she didn't know. "I can assure you my auntie didn't break anything. She's honest and she could help you." Betty felt like she was going to regret this for sure. Maybe she should have bought her boyfriend Graham, like he had suggested. Betty stepped forward. "Help you how?" "Your nephew mentions you're a private investigator." As much as Betty wanted to correct her, as she loved the more playful term private eye, Betty knew this probably wasn't the time, considering whoever this woman was still thought she was guilty. "Bettie English, private eye, at your service." The woman nodded. "Our cameras aren't working at the moment and my boss isn't happy with me. If I hire you to watch the store for a couple of hours." Betty's mouth dropped. "Wait. I have Christmas shopping to do. I have a mini convention to buy food for, and it's Christmas soon." "Auntie, I can do the shopping for you." Betty wanted to protest, but she supposed she loved Sean too much and he was being nice, but Betty didn't want to do this. "How much?" Betty asked. "We paid the last security person £100 for the night." Betty didn't know whether to be shocked, pleased or horrified that a security person is actually given that much money for a few hours of work. But the sound of £100 for 2 little hours, it did sound good. It was technically her turn to host and pay for most of iFoodCon, so that money would easily pay for it. £100 for the night. Extra 20 for false accusations, Betty said. The woman frowned. "And throw it 2 bottles of whatever Sean wants since you hesitated," Betty said, smiling. "Fine. I trust you know how to look innocent and like a random shopper." As she watched the woman and Sean walk off so he could choose what he wanted, Betty looked around the massive store and rolled her eyes. Some days it really sucked to be a private eye, but £100 was £100 that she didn't have before, and maybe she could find a nice present for Graham to buy her. The advantages of borrowing his credit card earlier. Walking up the rows of perfume bottles, Betty didn't know how these 2 hours were going to go. Surely a perfume shop didn't see that much crime at Christmas. After an hour and 45 minutes, Betty couldn't believe how brilliant this actually was. At first she thought she was going to hate it with a passion, but she didn't. Betty had already found some great new perfumes that she loved. She found the foul-smelling one that her dad loved, and she even found a new special one for herself that she might wear on Christmas Day. But Betty still didn't want to buy any of them, because as much as they were great perfumes, they weren't cheap, and £100 was not going to cover it. Not by a long shot. Betty ran her fingers over the cold white shelves, as she looked at all the perfume and aftershave bottles in all their different sizes, shapes and colors. The bottles were beautiful, but Betty remembered from her business study classes at school that was all part of the visual appeal. It did nothing practical, except from increase the prices. The sound of customers talking, Trying on perfume and judging the smells echoed all around the massive shop as Betty waited for her 2 hours to be up. Yet Betty could have sworn there was another sound she was hearing. It was like the low, quiet voices of two people conspiring to do something. Betty had hated the idea of people stealing from the start. It was Christmas, for crying out loud. This was not a time for stealing, it was a time for love, giving and caring. Walking to the end of the shelf she was looking at, Betty's eyes narrowed on the two young women that were close together and trying on different perfumes. To other people they may not have looked like criminals or would-be shoplifters, but Betty recognized the closeness, quiet voices and the long expensive coats of the two girls. It reminded Betty of her own troublesome streak when she was a teenager. If that was the case with these two women, then Betty supposed she could get rid of them without any major problems. But these women weren't teenagers, they were fully fledged adults, who were looking like they were going to try and steal something. After a few moments of watching, Betty noticed that one of the women had got out her phone, and was pretending to take a phone call. Betty shook her head as she watched the perfectly clear black screen of the girl's phone. If you're going to pretend to take a pretend phone call, you need to make it a bit more convincing. Betty wondered if she should get the woman or the manager to deal with them, but she wasn't going to risk losing her £100 for simply failing to do her assigned job. She wasn't risking any comments like that. As the woman with the phone pretended to nod, promised the person on the other side of the call she'd take a picture and check the surroundings, completely missing Betty. Betty knew that this woman was an amateur. There was no way these two had done shoplifting before. If Betty was doing this, she would have been in the car park driving home by now. Then Betty watched in horror as the two women did a final check of the store, missed Betty, and just picked up the perfumes like it was nothing and placed it in their coat pockets. Betty walked towards them. The two women pretended to act normal.
"I know what you just did," Betty said.
"We ain't steal nothing," the pretend phone caller said. Betty shook her head. "I finish my shift in 2 minutes. I do not want to be here any longer than I have to be. Just apologize, pay for the perfumes and go."
"We ain't steal nothing," they both said together.
Betty hated this entire thing. She had Christmas shopping to do, iFoodCon to plan and buy for, and on top of all of that, she no longer wanted to be in some perfume shop. "Empty your pockets," Betty said firmly. The two women ran. Betty ran after them. Her feet pounded the floor. The two women were fast. Betty couldn't let them leave the shop. She looked around. The women were close to the exit. There were a sea of shoppers. Betty was going to lose them. Betty panicked. Picked up a perfume bottle. Threw it. It smashed on the woman's back. She fell forward, catching the other woman. There was something oddly satisfying around that, Betty realized as she walked over and stood over the two injured women, who frowning, and probably wished they had tried another shop. The tall business-like woman ran over to Betty. "Miss English, what have you done? These two women were stealing. I stopped them. You owe me my £100. You damaged my store. You broke a bottle of perfume. You..." Betty shook her head. "My £100 and extra 20 please. Or I will call your head office and tell them you hired a private eye on company time and money, without approval." Betty couldn't help but smile as the woman looked so shocked and panicked, as if this was the first time ever she had been challenged. "Fine, Miss English," the woman said, giving Betty her money.
"Let's do this again sometime," Betty said, leaving the shop. "Let's not," Betty heard the woman muttered.
The moment she left the shop, Betty glided into the sea of busy, grumpy shoppers and called Sean. As the phone dialed, she was slightly surprised how good she was feeling after all of that. It felt great to be out in December, doing her shopping and stopping crime at the same time. But now she had to get on with the most important event in the private eye calendar, iFoodCon. Sean picked up his phone. Betty smiled. "Hi Sean, want to come to iFoodCon with me?" A few days later, Betty sat on a terribly cold chair on the head of a long oak table, with wonderfully decorated Christmas decorations covering the entire walls. Betty loved all their baubles, tinsel, and the wreaths that covered the walls of the business room, that she had hired especially for the convention. And as she watched all the different private eyes in all their different ethnicities, sizes and heights eat the beautiful golden, crispy food in front of them, and the rest of the juicy meats and other sweet treats that covered the entire length of the table, Betty realized something precious. The sound of happy private eyes talking, chatting and laughing with one another reminded Betty how iFoodCon should be explained to anyone. Betty looked at Sean, who was laughing with a young woman at the table, and he saw her. Betty leaned closer to Sean.
You see all this?
Sean looked around and nodded.
This is what iFoodCon is all about.
No matter your race, religion, preferences, whatever. You are always welcome in the private eye community. We are all a family. Sean smiled at that.
So what is iFoodCon, you ask? Betty said.
Sean leant closer. iFoodCon is about community and the secular side of Christmas. I love all private eyes no matter who they are, and I welcome them all. This mini convention is a reminder of that at this time of year. Sean looked around a final time. Just because we don't all celebrate Christmas doesn't mean we can't love, give, and support each other at this time of year. Just saying that made Betty feel all Christmassy and merry, because she knew that was all the truth, and that's why she loved being a private eye, because it truly was a community. A loving, supporting, and amazing community for all. Betty was a bit surprised when Sean kissed her cheek and held her hands.
Merry Christmas, Auntie.
Betty stood up and said to everyone, a Merry Christmas, New Year and all the other celebrations to everyone.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.